Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about bad seniors. So let's get into it. So the question in question was pretty much a story, and maybe it's not about bad seniors because we don't know. It could be a bad senior, or it could just be a very unfortunate situation. But let's go through it. Hi Frederick, how are you doing? I would like to ask you a question of an interesting case I'm looking at, which I wouldn't really know what to do with. A UX designer just started working at a small startup. Currently, there is only one developer, and one of the managers takes the role of PO. The manager doesn't know about web development. They are working their way up from a WordPress site to an MVP web application. The developer is in charge of deciding if things are viable to implement or not, and the PO will listen to him, of course. The problem is that everything that the designer creates generates a lot of discussion with the developer. For example, the developer finds so many things for the design to be too hard to implement. The problem is that we are talking about simple progress bars, tooltips, drop down menus, things that even the designer has an idea of how to do with simple HTML and CSS. I was not in their discussions, but by the things that the designer told me, something is not right. The developer is said to have over 20 years of experience in the field, coming from big companies, working a lot with backend and not much front-end experience at all. Now, I've heard some absurd things, like when presented with a simple progress bar, the developer would talk about maybe there are React libraries for that, but we are not using React, so I don't know if he can do it. Or that he thinks that the registration is the most important feature of the app. We are talking about a learning platform for students. Or that some front-end programmers might be hired, but that they will probably have 3 weeks of experience, alluding that they wouldn't know how to do the work. Plus, he seems to talk a lot and throws in a lot of unnecessary words and concerns for technical topics, for example security, to avoid making a simple design. This developer might be really good or not, who knows, but from my point of view, all these things I hear are coming from a novice developer that doesn't correspond to a 20 plus years old experienced person, or 20 years experienced person. In the end, he is the only developer around. There's no one to discuss on a technical level with him, but the designer has a pretty clear idea of what is possible and not from working with the developers, working with other developers. Plus, we regularly talk about development, as I am a software engineer myself. I think they must talk with the manager clearly about front-end development and avoid one-on-one meetings, which seems to be generating a bit of broken phone, and that in my opinion gives more power to the developer to influence the PO wrongly, telling him that things are much more complex than they truly are. But I wouldn't really know how to handle this practically from a UX designer's point of view. Is this something you have dealt with in the past? By the way, thank you so much for all the videos that you make. They have helped me greatly. No worries. Yes, I have dealt with this. I actually made a video about this. It's an old one, and it's in that video I try to explain why a bad senior developer is 100 times worse for a company than a bad junior developer, because a junior developer and the impact a junior developer has on the company is much lower than a senior software developer. Because basically what you have here is the equivalent of having, say, let's say a large corporation. Now, it's the equivalent of having a really shitty architect or a really shitty technical decision maker of some sort. And I like to make the analogy to that if a company works as a car, and you have an engine which represents your capacity to produce software or whatever, like some type of business value, and the manager is the pedal, or the person making the call is the pedal. If the pedal is broken, it does not matter what is possible. It doesn't matter how strong the engine is, because the manager, the person the stakeholder who's pushing the pedal, is dealing with a broken pedal. Nothing happens on the other end. That is what you're dealing with right now. You have a senior who you simply don't know if you can trust. But the problem is that the PO trusts him. And that, in this case, the PO is actually also the manager of the company, I assume. That is a big problem, because this person has seniority over you. And in a group discussion between the UX designer, the technical, like the engineer, and the stakeholder, like the PO, and so forth. And that's another video that I've made. There's so many things here that I can relate to. The software developer will always win, always. And because there are people who've asked me, like, how do I win over the designer? And I go, it's very simple. You just tell them it's going to take longer than they feel is comfortable. That's it. The designer has nothing. It doesn't matter what the designer wants. No sane stakeholder is going to, I don't know, if you make up something about it, as an example, if there's a security risk with the tooltip, that seems really weird. But if you make that up, and the PO has no way of checking this, and the designer technically doesn't either, because the only person who's perceived as being an expert in something that is technical or something that actually matters in this discussion is the engineer. It's the person who's going to build the thing, and their word is always the final word if they play this right. Now, the person that you are describing to me, if let's say for the sake of argument that he has 20 years of experience, I don't know. Based on what you have said so far, I can't say so much. I'm pretty sure that if I sat with him for, say, 30 minutes, I can immediately determine if he has 20 years or not. And that it's like that. And this is your problem. You only have him. And you have no other frame of reference. So as you were saying yourself, he could be completely right. The system can be super insecure. It can be all kinds of issues. I mean, he could have caused them. Who knows? Or he can be completely innocent. There's no way for you to tell. Only another developer will be able to determine what the situation actually looks like. So what you have to do, basically, the only card you have to play, is to go to the PO. And even if you were to do your thing, like go and have like a group discussion and things like that, it's not going to help. Because as long as the software developer says that this is going to take that amount of time or that amount of time, your designer will never win. It doesn't matter what the designer wants, because the PO wants to make money, ship on time, do these sorts of things. And design is unfortunately a very subjective thing. So unless you have a PO who really cares about design, which you very clearly don't, you have a problem. You have a big problem. And so the only thing you can do is to tell the PO and try to approach the problem from their perspective and say, well, and this is me assuming something, because we're going to talk about my assumption as well. You're going to have to go, well, the results that we're seeing right now aren't really the thing that we are looking for, and it's damaging the company. So maybe it would be a good idea for us to investigate if we can pull in a front-end developer or something like that. Because the thing is, like, yeah, will have 3 weeks of experience. Guys, there are plenty of people who in front-end who know what they're doing, and even someone with 3 weeks of experience will probably be able to solve at least some of these problems that you have been describing that this other senior software developer cannot. He is not the world's only person who can deal with the software related issues. I can promise you that much. So that's what you can do. And here is the problem now. The problem is that if your PO sucks, nothing's gonna happen. And this is the horrible, horrible, horrible truth. This is the darkest truth that I will ever give you, most likely. Guys, you could be the only useful person in a company, or you could be the only useful person in your team in a company, and the company could be drowning. The company could be going completely bankrupt. And I have been here. I have been the voice of reason in a company that was hemorrhaging money at a rate that is insane, and nobody would listen until everybody had to be laid off because they didn't have enough money to sustain the thing. And I don't think even at that point they didn't listen. They got to the point where they were seeing me as the problem, even though we're basically right. about the whole thing. Like, we basically, there was no discussion about what was going on, right? Well, clearly there was, but anywho. And see, the problem is that if the designer wants what the designer wants, and the sad truth is that if you're still making money and the designer isn't getting what he or she wants, then it really doesn't matter to the company. Think about it. If the developer is shipping, the code is doing what you're making money from the thing, does it matter what the design looks like? Well, of course it does. Your designer cares about it, but if the PO doesn't care, the developer doesn't care, well then clearly you're the weaker party. You're the person who's going to have to make the decision. Do you want to stay in this company and try to influence it in the right direction? And that basically comes down to, as I said, to convince the PO to get a second opinion, or you're going to have to quit. These are the only options. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you have the wrong senior software developer, and this is something that has happened to me so many times. It can be that he is vastly overstating his qualifications, and he wouldn't even be considered a junior developer. We don't know. Or he could just be really bad at what he does, or he could be completely right about all these things. It's impossible to say without having a second opinion. It's like going to the doctor when they give you a really weird diagnosis or a treatment or things like that. You're not an expert, so therefore you cannot say anything about it really, and I can't either based on the little information I have. But what you can do is to tell your PO that this workflow isn't working for you, and try to convince your PO to take in a second opinion, and that's ideally another developer, someone who can evaluate. And because if you do that and you see that it is possible, well then hopefully your PO is going to make the connection that the problem isn't that it's impossible. The problem is that you're dealing with an individual who can't do the job. And this is why we have all these interviews, guys. This is why this situation right here is what they are all afraid of. That's why all of these interviewing code tests and all this stuff happens, because if this happens, it can kill the entire company. So unfortunately, this is your only move, because if you're really unlucky, your PO is as shit as your developer, or potentially, and they might not even care. And I've been in that situation too, where you can go to the manager, and the manager often in a big company, they don't give a shit about what's happening at the company. They really don't. It's because they're not there to help the company, really. They're there to cash out a paycheck. So they're not going to lift their finger to make the situation better. And then you have to go through their boss and play all these office politics or something like that. Or you can just quit and try to find a job where they actually care about the work that they do. Have a great day.